Welcome to the InnovaBuzz podcast, where we share all kinds of tips, advice, and interview guests on all things innovation and leadership in modern marketing. Each episode is a conversation with inspiring people who make wonderful contributions to our knowledge in these areas and spark curiosity and ideas to pursue. Join me, Jürgen Strauss from InnovaBuzz, and let's get into today's masterclass on this InnovaBuzz podcast.
There's been so much scientific research into what drives a culture of innovation, and what we know from meta-analyses is that there are about 14 variables that matter. So, some of those variables are we need a culture that is okay with risk-taking and failure. We need a culture where there's a high level of cohesion in that people feel like they're playing on the same team. And what we spoke about before, people feeling challenged by their roles, is another one of the most important drivers. So there's a lot of things that can impact it. But I think what's important is that it's important not to trust your gut when you're thinking about what creates a culture of innovation, because generally what our gut thinks and what science shows are a little bit different.
Hi there, Innovator. It's great to be back with you and with another episode of the InnovaBuzz podcast. I hope you've had a really awesome week so far. I trust too that you enjoyed my recent conversations with Tony D'Urso of the Tony D'Urso Show and with David Smulders of BitQ. I'm really excited to have on the InnovaBuzz podcast today as my guest, Dr. Amantha Imber, who's an innovation psychologist, a best-selling author and founder of Australia's leading innovation consultancy, Inventium. Inventium has been recognised as one of Australia's fastest-growing companies in the Business Review Weekly Fast 100 list, and was also awarded the Client Choice Award by that same magazine for Best Management Consultancy in Australia. In 2016, Amantha was inducted into the Australian Businesswomen's Hall of Fame. She's the co-creator of the Australian Financial Review's Most Innovative Companies list, and her thoughts have appeared in Harvard Business Review, The Huffington Post, Forbes, and Fast Company. And she's author of two best-selling books, The Creativity Formula and The Innovation Formula. So I'm really looking forward to talking with Amantha today. A quick promotional message from our sponsor. That's me, or more accurately, my business, InnovaBuzz. We help coaches and consultants build professional credibility, engage their target audience, and connect with their ideal clients. The result is that their ideal clients virtually self-select and line up to work with them. To help you get clarity about who your ideal client is and how you can build a strong, enduring relationship with them, take a look at our Marketing Master mini class. It's just 2 modules and will take you less than 30 minutes to work through. And in that short time, you'll get total clarity on your ideal client and how you can communicate with them to build and strengthen an engaging, enduring relationship. You can even use the exercise to define your ideal audience for a podcast, for a speech, or a presentation. Access the Marketing Master mini class at innovabiz.co/marketing master. It is completely free and it's accessible without even giving me your email. In today's discussion, Amantha talked to me about the difference between creativity and innovation. We explored how to develop and sustain a culture of innovation, and she gave a whole bunch of great tips on innovation and productivity that she's learned from guests on her How I Work podcast. Without further ado then, let's fly into the hive and get the buzz from Amantha Imber. I'm your host, Jürgen Strauss from InnovaBuzz, and I'm excited today to welcome to the InnovaBuzz podcast from Melbourne, Australia, Dr. Amantha Imber, who's an innovation psychologist. She's a best-selling author, and she's founder of Australia's leading innovation consultancy, Inventium. Welcome to the podcast, Amantha. It's a great privilege to have you as a guest.
Good to be here.
Adam Ashton, who was our guest on episode 187 of the InnovaBuzz podcast, suggested we interview you. So a big hello to Adam as well. Now, Amantha, in addition to running Inventium, where your mission is to turn people into brilliant innovators, you also host the How I Work podcast, interviewing innovators about their strategies for structuring their day and other strategies. And you've written 2 books, The Creativity Formula and The Innovation Formula. I'm really looking forward to having an in-depth conversation with you today about all things innovation and productivity. But before we start talking about those things, give us a bit of a snapshot of your background. How did you get to where you are today, and what were some of the pivotal moments in that journey?
So I, from a fairly young age, I think when I was a teenager, I decided that I wanted to be a psychologist. So I grew up with a mother who's a clinical psychologist, and she would share stories of her work with me quite frequently. And I was always intrigued about why people do what they do. And I like the idea of having a career that was all about helping people in some way. And so when I went to uni, I also did want to become an actor, and I actually wanted to go and audition for NIDA or VCA, or one of the top acting schools in Australia, but my parents dissuaded me from doing that. They said, maybe as a compromise, go like get an arts degree, major in psychology, major in drama or theatre, and then maybe, see how you're feeling about it after your undergrad. So that was good advice, because I realized that acting is a pretty tough industry full of rejection. So I did those 2 majors, and then realized that I did want to still become a psychologist and specialize in that. So I ended up studying psychology for 7 years. So did my doctorate in organizational psychology, which is basically helping people people at work, as opposed to helping people be more organized. Some people think organizational psychology is that, but it's not. And then after I finished my PhD, I went into advertising, working as a consumer psychologist for about 5 years, and helping people buy more stuff that they didn't necessarily need. And I kind of just the ethics of what I was doing never really sat right with me. So I knew I wanted to do something else. I knew I wanted to get back to my org psych roots and help people in a more meaningful way, as opposed to just help them buy more chocolate bars. And I gave my boss 3 months notice. I interviewed for a bunch of different jobs, but I couldn't really find anything that I wanted to go into. And the one place I did find that was a global innovation consultancy didn't want me. So plan B was do my own thing, which was Inventium, which I started 12 years ago. And so for the last 12 years, I've been helping people and large corporates sort of turn their people into better innovators.
That's a interesting journey. So from a number of kind of areas where you felt there was rejection, and you turned it into a positive for yourself. So I like the idea of, well, if they don't want to take me, I'll start up an organization like that myself. So tell us what it is you do today with Inventium.
So what my role is, or what the company does?
Well, let's start off with what the company does, and then we'll talk about your role.
Yeah, sure. So what Inventium does, we're an innovation consultancy. We spend a lot of time building capability, so turning people into better innovators, and practically what that means is helping people get better at getting closer to the customer and understanding where are the biggest opportunities for innovation, and giving them tools to help them think more creatively about problems and test those ideas leanly and quickly and cheaply. We do a lot of assessment work as well, and we helped in partnership with Fairfax create the Australian Financial Review's Most Innovative Companies list. So we've run that every year for the last 8 years, and I still get involved in judging those awards. And more recently, a big focus for the firm has been helping people reinvent the way they work and get better at doing deep focused work and not kind of falling victim to all the digital distractions that we're faced with in the workplace.
And what's your role now in the company?
So for the last 12 years, I was heading up the company, so CEO, if you like, which I think like it's a bit of a weird title when it's a small business. There are about 15 of us between Melbourne and Sydney, but CEO is a helpful title when it comes to, opening doors and stuff like that. But, it's a bit of a silly title, I think, in a small business where you don't have any other chiefs of anything. But recently, though, about back in April, I think it was, I demoted myself into being a full-time maker. So someone within the company, like a wonderful, wonderful, super clever teammate, Michelle Lepoidovin, became the CEO, which she's just terrific. And I no longer kind of, manage people in inverted commas. So my days are spent being a maker, which means I do a lot of research, I do a lot of writing, I do a lot of new product development. I still do sort of sales and business development, and I do a lot of keynote speaking.
That's fascinating. So I'm curious, what prompted you to kind of hand over the reins of, I guess, running the company to somebody else, and how easy or difficult was that as the founder of the company to let that go?
Super easy. It's something I'd wanted to do probably for a couple of years, but just the timing hadn't been right. And, in terms of like having the right person, like the timing was perfect for Mish. I've worked with her for, I don't know, like 5.5 years or something like that. But she was right in the trenches of studying an MBA as well as being at Inventium full time. So very demanding workload. And so she finished her MBA at the end of last year. So the timing, was all really, really great. But for me, like, essentially like as a leader, and look, as anyone, I guess there's two things that people can do. I like Paul Graham's essay about it around maker time and manager time. And most people are either in white collar industries, they're makers, they're making something, or they're managing people. And I was doing both in my role as CEO. Like I was still doing all the things that I do in my current role, but I was also managing people and running a business. And that was never the energizing thing for me. Like I do like mentoring people, but I simply would I'm not that energized anymore by managing people. I'm more interested in playing with ideas and researching and learning, as distinct from managing people. Like I still mentor people in the business informally, and I mentor people outside of the business in more formal ways, but I would always prioritize my maker time over my manager time, which is not a very helpful attribute in a CEO. So, so it was a very, very easy transition and an awesome transition to make.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating. So coming back to innovation, I know, well, you've got two books there about innovation and creativity. And is there a difference between innovation and creativity?
Yeah, there absolutely is. I mean, creativity in terms of how scientists define it is novelty plus utility. So for something to be creative, it needs to be new and it needs to be useful. And we would say that innovation is creativity implemented. Like creativity in and of itself is not particularly valuable for a business. It's only when that creative thing is implemented or put out into the world that it becomes valuable.
So creativity is like the idea that someone might have, but innovation is when that idea actually is implemented and becomes real and makes a difference to people's lives.
Yes.
All right, that makes a lot of sense. Now I know you mentioned your background in psychology, and I know you use a lot of science, management science, neuroscience to work with organisations so that they can become more innovative, they can learn to be innovative. So I guess the first question around that, then, and this is something that
I think is kind of a universally accepted belief, but one that I'd like to challenge, and I'm sure you would too, and that's is innovation or creativity something that's inborn?
Yes. So we know from studies into monozygotic twins, so twins that are genetically identical, that like creativity, for example, is about 30% genetically predetermined, which means that 70% is up to us. And, quite frankly, we wouldn't have a business if innovation was something you were born with or not. Like
Hmm.
it's very much, I mean, there's thousands of scientific papers that demonstrate very clearly that your ability to innovate is something that is a competency like any competency that can be improved with the right kind of training and tools and stimulus and so forth.
Hmm. All right. Well, what I mean, you talk in your TED talk about the innovation sweet spot. So what do you mean by that? Tell us a little bit more there.
So what I talk about in that talk is around the idea that the amount of challenge that you feel in your job, like on a day-to-day basis, has a direct impact on your ability and motivation to innovate. So there's like a U-shaped relationship here in terms of how innovative you will be. And it directly corresponds to how challenged you are. So if you're in a role where you could do the majority of your projects and tasks with your eyes shut, I like you're going to be pretty bored, then innovation output is very low, perhaps not surprisingly. But also the opposite is true. If you're in a job where there's just so much challenge that it's actually stressful and you don't have the resources like time and money to rise up and meet that challenge and the skills, like it's also going to be incredibly hard to innovate. Like your innovation output will be low, so you want to find that sweet spot where there's a high level of challenge but you've got the skills and the resources to rise to that challenge, and that is the innovation sweet spot.
Hmm. Yeah, that's fascinating. It reminds me a little bit of one of my guests, and I'm just trying to think who that was, talking about leadership, and they were saying that um, the best way to lead individual team members is to kind of, they likened it to stretching the rubber band, but you don't want to break the rubber band. So you want to stretch it enough to challenge them, but not break it. And so in a way that's what it reminds me of.
Yeah, it's a nice analogy.
Hmm. Now, what what kind of things do you think people need to put in place to build a culture of innovation in an organization and then to sustain that?
Well, yeah, it was the topic of my second book, The Innovation Formula, which that there's been so much scientific research into what drives a culture of innovation. And what we know from meta-analyses is that there are about 14 variables that matter. So, some of those variables are we need a culture that is okay with risk taking and failure. We need a culture where there's a high level of cohesion in that people feel like they're playing on the same team. And what we spoke about before, people feeling challenged by their roles, is another one of the most important drivers. So there's a lot of things that can impact it. But I think what's important is that it's important not to trust your gut when you're thinking about what creates a culture of innovation, because generally what our gut thinks and what science shows are a little bit different.
Yeah, yeah. So what I guess I'm curious around the neuroscience aspect and what people's beliefs about themselves and about others contributes to how innovative they might be or how innovative their organization might be. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, look, it does have a big impact. I mean, there's certainly research that I'm aware of that suggests that the more creative we think we are, the more creative we'll be. So it's kind of this self-fulfilling prophecy, which I think is true of a lot of things, in psychology and behavior. So, people that don't think that they've got a creative bone in their body probably won't perform that well in an
Hmm.
ideation session. And I think also, like having a learning orientation as opposed to a performance orientation has been shown to be really important. So prioritizing learning over like performance essentially has a very direct relationship with innovation. And if we're looking at like personality traits, for example, like the big five model of personality traits is probably one of the most common models, and one of those five traits is around how open you are to new experiences. And we know that people that have a high openness to experience in terms of personality traits perform more creatively when it comes to solving problems. And then there's all, like Carol Dweck's work around growth mindset, versus fixed mindset. So that's, that's also very helpful for innovation. So that there's a bunch of different factors that can come into play.
Hmm. Yeah, it's a fascinating topic because I think, as a psychologist, you probably do a lot of work around how do people's belief systems play into how they work within the organization, and how they, what sort of managers they are, and how they build culture into their organization. And I'm just curious how that all plays out, because I know if you look at the kind of the 6 core needs of everyone, there's this balance between variety and certainty, for example, that if somebody's very heavily weighted towards certainty and very rigid in their approach to life, and everything has to be exactly the way it always is, then you think they might not be that creative. But on the other hand, if something disrupts that certainty, then they're going to be really driven to restoring their own level of certainty. And so they might get really creative about doing something to give them back that certainty.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
All right. Now, one of the things that I find fascinating and annoying or frustrating at the same time is in Australia, we kind of have lots of people that are really creative and doing some fabulous things, even on the big scale on the world stage. If you think about some of the big inventions that have come out of Australia that have gone global, like think Wi-Fi, not sure, I can't think of off the top of my mind something else at the moment, but Wi-Fi is a big one. There's a whole range of them. And yet there's a lot that kind of just disappear somewhere, or they get bought out. Like one of my guests a while back develops solar windows. So the window itself is actually the solar collector, and it's a pretty significant development, I think, on the world stage. And yet in Australia, there seems to be this mentality of, unless you can dig it out of the ground or just cut it out and send it offshore in the raw form and let somebody else add value to it, it's of no value. So there's no investment done in it. What are your thoughts around that, around the idea of why don't we commercialize more of the innovation that actually comes out of Australia?
I don't know. I wish I had a good answer, and I do not know.
Yeah. Is that a mindset thing, or is there something else going on there? Is it just that
I just think
because we've got these riches of natural resources, that's the easy option, and we don't kind of do the work to...
I just think it's really hard to generalize. I mean, like in some companies, things might not get commercialized because people might not see the merit in an idea, or it might be too risky. In other companies, I think it's a resources problem, and maybe they do want to commercialize it, but they can't get funding if, say, they're a startup. So I just think it's really hard to kind of give a blanket response, oh, it's this or it's that, because I think and thinking about our clients and, startups that I work with, I think it's different depending on the person and the team and the company.
Yeah, I just wonder about, because obviously in the startup space, people are looking to get funding and support for their ideas so that they can resource them. And I wonder whether, because a lot of the startups end up going overseas and they land in Silicon Valley or places like that, because that's where the venture capital funding is that is prepared to invest in the ideas and support them.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, I know you also do the How I Work podcast, which kind of takes a different approach to innovation. You interview people there who are innovators in their field, but you interview them a little bit more around what their work habits are and how they keep themselves productive and innovative. So tell us a little bit more about the How I Work podcast.
Yeah, so I listen to a lot of podcasts, and I listen to a lot of interview podcasts because I like the format and I like hearing people that I like kind of talk and get insight into them. But what I felt like with most interview podcasts is people I became even more acutely aware of this when I research my guests that are coming on the podcast, is that people just talk about the same old stuff like in interview format podcasts. Like it's about the ideas that they're writing about or sharing, or their story of origin, or like whatever it is. And I sort of see how I work as almost like going behind the curtain in the Wizard of Oz, and actually seeing what goes on behind the scenes in someone's life. Like I feel like, there are so many people in the world that I admire that I'm like, oh, I'd love to know how they work or how they approach that, or how, they have achieved so much. Yet, we've, as that meme said, we've all got the same amount of hours in the day as Beyonce. So, like, what are they doing differently? And that's essentially the question that I set out to get answered with the How I Work podcast, where I find people that I really love the work that they're producing in the world. And a lot of them are at the top of their fields. And I'm like, how are they doing that? Like, are they what are their habits and rituals? And like, where are they finding their best ideas? And like, what are the strategies and things that they find really useful? And, it's certainly not, oh, okay, well, we should all replicate that. But, what I think is if listeners kind of even just get one or two gems that they're going to try out and experiment with in their own life, then I think that's pretty cool. And then the other type of thing that I do on How I Work is that I have little mini episodes where, because of my job as a scientist, I'm constantly researching how people can work better and have better work habits. And so the other part of the show is looking at what's the research telling us around different kind of tips and strategies and hacks that will make us more productive and perform better and be happier at work. So that's all a huge passion of mine. Like the podcast is probably, out of everything I do in my working life, I think right now my podcast and all the work that goes around that, it brings me a lot of joy.
Yeah, I can understand that. So with with the How I Work podcast, you've had some really impressive guests on. How did you go about starting up and getting the guests, and how do you kind of go about getting access to those people who are kind of leaders in their field and probably very busy and not necessarily having podcasting as having podcast interviews as part of their kind of day-to-day work?
So I started the podcast a couple of months after I'd attended TED 2018, and I used TED 2018 as a way to reach out to people that I really wanted to have on the podcast. And with the sort of the main TED conference, like you have to apply to go, so it's kind of this curated group of 2,000 people, and there's this huge amount of generosity and also trust, I think, in that community. So like I know now that, like, being part of that community, if you kind of reach out to a fellow TEDster, there's a much higher likelihood that they will be happy to help you out just because they're part of that same community. So my early guests like Adam Grant and Amanda Palmer, Nancy Duarte, a few others, I met or either connected with at my very first TED conference back like a year and a half ago. And then what I found when I reach out to guests is that, because I have had quite a lot of big names now on the podcast, like a year into it, it's kind of like and I think for me, like when I'm deciding, whether to speak at a conference or be on a podcast or whatever. Like, and unless I'm sort of doing it as a favor to a friend or something like that, I'm influenced by who else has been on the show. Like, it's just kind of a quick shortcut to go, is this going to be a decent event? Is this going to be a decent podcast? So I think, being able to mention the high profile names like begets other high profile names, sort of find, just kind of works that way. So yeah, so that's kind of how it started, and it sort of snowballed from there, I guess. But also like now what I find, because I've been doing it for a while now, and it's certainly I mean the Apple podcast charts change all the time, but it certainly spent quite a lot of time at number one on the business charts, and as a result, I'll get pitched to a lot by by our PR people or guests themselves wanting to be on the show. But for me, it's like, because I do hours of preparation before each interview, like I have to really love the work of the guest. Otherwise, it's just going to be very boring researching them. So I'm also just very very fussy about who I have on the show. Like, I need to personally be interested in their work. Otherwise, the preparations, it's going to be a nightmare, and I'm probably, going to be a little bit bored. And so, yeah.
I can relate to that really well too. And I was listening, I think it was Eric Johnson, the podcast talent coach, was talking on one of his recent episodes about, and he was using the analogy of the ice hockey goalkeeper, because I think he's into ice hockey in a big way. He was talking about the ice hockey goalkeeper, and that's what you need to be for your podcast. So making sure that the people you have on your podcast, you actually don't let them go through and into the net if they're not a really good fit for you and for your audience.
Yeah, 100%.
All right. So what are some of the learnings that you've got out of the podcast interviews then?
Oh, so many. Some ones that have stuck with me though. Like, one of my favorite interviews was with Cal Newport, who's a real hero of mine. So he wrote Deep Work and Digital Minimalism, amongst other books, and is also a professor at Georgetown. And I had him on the show a few months ago. And one of the insights that he gave into his life is that he will have different rituals for the different types of deep work he does, and deep work sort of being the work that requires focus and concentration. So, for example, if he's trying to like work on like a maths theorem, he'll generally walk around campus or around the streets, like between the university and his home, sort of trying to solve it. Whereas if he's doing writing work, he got this custom made desk in his home that was designed to resemble one of the university library desks that he spent so much time on in his university years when he was a student. And I really liked that, and I think about that a lot now. Like, I've sort of because I generally spend my mornings doing deep work, and I've really sort of run with this idea of having these rituals for the different types of deep work that I do. And so now, like, for example, I've got about 3 cafes that I will deep work from where I'm doing writing. So I do a lot of writing. I write sort of several columns for different publications. And I now, because I've ritualized it, I sort of have this Pavlovian response when I sit down in a certain cafe. I'm like, okay, I know what I'm here to do, and I can just sort of get stuck into it and get into flow pretty quickly. So I really love that. And another thing that stuck with me, so I had Dan Pink on the show a few months ago, and something I love about his work is I feel like he just finds these brilliant titles for his book. And then I remember when I was reading Adam Grant's book, Give and Take, he'd actually acknowledged Dan Pink and the acknowledgements as the person that had actually helped him come up with the title, Give and Take, which again is like such another brilliant title for a book. And so I was asking him like what his process is for coming up with book titles and helping other people do that. And he basically says he just sort of like asks them to talk about the concept, and he's sort of listening for sort of key phrases or interesting turns of phrase and kind of grabbing onto those as sort of potential starting points for the title of a book. And I don't know, that's such like a niche sort of specific thing, But I really liked that as advice for sort of thinking about how to title projects, which is something that I just struggle with. I think it's really hard coming up
Okay.
with great titles for work.
Oh, I have to listen to those episodes. I didn't listen to those ones because we were doing some work recently with a couple of podcasts, launching a couple of new podcasts and trying to come up with the title for that. And I was in the same sort of state. I thought, I can't think of a really good title for this one. We did come up with a couple of good ones for the ones we've got, and I'm pretty happy with them. But I thought, there must be a better process for this. It's which brings me back to the idea of innovation. There are processes for actually being creative or innovative, right?
Oh, 100%. That's a lot of what we do with our clients, teaching them those processes.
All right. Now, I was going to go somewhere else with the podcast question, but I've kind of lost my thread now. So what episode number are you up to now?
I think like 100-ish, give or take a few. I'm not really sure. I don't really count the episodes. I just try to be consistent. I generally try to release 2 episodes a week, but I can't say I've been counting the episodes. Maybe I should be. I think it's about 100.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's pretty impressive. So you've been going for about a year then.
Yeah.
And what are some of the other things that you've learned around doing the podcast? Because you said earlier that you're really enjoying that part of it, which I can relate to because it's one of the things that gives me a lot of joy, speaking to people and learning about what drives them and learning about how they approach things. And to me, it's like having a 1-hour masterclass with an expert, and I always go away inspired. So what kind of things do you see getting out of the podcast, and what's it done for you and your business?
Yeah. So I think what you said, it's like, because you've got a podcast, it gives you this license to have conversations with people that would normally, never give you the time of day. Like, I recently had one of my comedy heroes on, Abby Jacobson, who from sort of Broad City fame, for any Broad City fans out there. And it's like, what else could I do that would allow me to have a conversation with Abby for 45 minutes and learn from her and her creative process. So I just think it's exactly what you said. It's like a masterclass, a personal masterclass with people that are just amazing, and sort of like the podcast gives you license to do that. But I think also for me, because I've been doing innovation for so long, and I'm kind of doing more than innovation now, like in terms of looking at kind of productivity and how people can really reinvent the way that they approach work. And that's sort of, been immersed in that area for a couple of years. So that's really interesting. But, I think like when you're in a field like innovation for so long, you kind of yearn for something new and to kind of be right at the beginning of that learning curve again. And I think that's what podcasting gave me. It's like I completely underestimated what a big learning curve it would be, how much time goes into producing a podcast, which I hope is like a relatively high quality podcast. Like obviously it's easy to record stuff and then, pump it out to the world. But I think, so much goes into producing a podcast, that, is hopefully like worthy of a listen. So I've just loved being at the beginning of the learning curve again, because I feel like it's been far too long since I've been there. So that's just been, amazing.
Which comes back to a point you made earlier about, the culture of innovation, and it being, learning is a key part of that as well. And certainly for me, I'm always looking to learn. At the end of the day, if I have some reflective time, I think, well, what did I learn today? And there's hardly any day where I can say nothing. There's always something, and sometimes it's quite significant. A lot of the times there's, why didn't I realize this before? Some little jigsaw piece will fall into place, and all of a sudden I'll see a big picture of something that will inspire me to go and do something different again with what I'm working on or in my personal life. So that's always exciting.
Mm.
All right. The other thing I wanted to touch on, and I know, you've done some innovative things in Inventium around productivity, and you mentioned productivity a moment ago, and that's around um, getting people to take their lunch while they're walking and talking with other people rather than having lunch at their desk because they're so focused on their work at that very moment, and also the idea of unlimited holiday time. So tell us a little bit more about what you've done there and what the thinking was behind that.
Yeah, sure. So we've had an unlimited paid leave policy in place for 3 years now, where it is as it sounds. People can take as much holiday paid as they want. That was we call it rebalance leave because the intent of the policy is for people to live a balanced life between working and the non-working aspects of their world, which I think in management consulting, which is broadly speaking our industry, can be quite challenging. We're in an industry where hours are uncapped, but for the average company, leave is capped at 4 weeks, as it was for us. So it just felt naturally fairer that, with the life of management consultant, which can be big hours and lots of travel and so forth, just giving people control over how much rest and recovery they need. Like, who am I as a company to say, well, it should be 4 weeks. That's what it needs to be.
Mm.
It's like, well, no, like that's going to be different for every person. And so since doing that 3 years ago, it's amazing. Like people are just a billion% more energized. Staff tenure, so the average time that people spend at Inventium has doubled over the last 3 years, and the business remains very profitable. So it's so that's been great. And then, look, I think, with things like trying not to eat lunch at your desk, and this is still something that I struggle with. I do try to be conscious of it, particularly because I talk about it and I write about it. Most days I will not eat and work at the same time because that is not a good habit to be into. You crash your afternoon energy levels and productivity and resilience levels by doing something like that, even though it might feel productive. But look, we try to practice what we preach. I mean, our new product development process mirrors the innovation process that we teach our clients. And likewise, with a lot of the things that we teach clients about reinventing their workday, we do that at Inventium. Like, if someone sends me an email, they will get an autoresponder saying, if you sent this email before lunchtime, I probably won't have read it, because 4 mornings out of 5, I don't check my email in the morning because I'm prioritizing deep work and I'm trying to work towards like my goals as opposed to reacting to other people's stuff, which is basically what email is.
Yeah, that's right. Yes, I heard somebody say that the email inbox is somebody else's to-do list that they make for you.
Yeah, I love that quote. That's great.
Yeah. Okay, I probably need to take a leaf out of your book because I actually read over, sort of go in and do my LinkedIn feed over lunch, but that's still work, isn't it? So
yes, it is.
All right, I did want to come back to the podcast and ask you about what are you going to continue on the theme of how do people be more creative and how do they structure their day, or do you have other plans to go forward? Because I noticed you've had some guests on more than once, so obviously there's different topics you cover with them.
No, I don't think I have had any guests on more than once, actually.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Maybe, yeah.
not at this stage. But no,
Maybe
it's
they were
generally.
summary podcasts that I was
Yeah, it
looking
could
at.
have been. I do a format called My Favorite Tip, where I
Oh,
will
okay.
I will sort of like, from the whole interview, I will pick out my favorite tip from the interview and sort of release that in a little mini episode. I certainly feel myself with some interview podcasts where it's like there'll be one gem that I really loved, but it's like I don't want to have to sit through the whole interview for that. So that's what that format is all about. But yeah, look, it does depend on the guest. Like I don't have like a standard set of questions that I will ask for every guest. I do really try to think about, you know, their work world, their context, and what, what for them, what's going to be interesting there. Like, for example, I had Tim Herrera on the show, who edits the Smarter Living section of the New York Times, which is a section that is all about work and life advice. And so, as someone editing a section of the New York Times, I'm like, whoa, he's going to be pitched to a lot. So, with him, one of the things I wanted to ask about is what makes a great pitch, which is really specific to Tim and his world. And he had some great advice there. But, and that's a key part of how he works. Like, sorting good pitches from bad pitches. So it's very guest dependent in terms of what specifically I want to ask about, in terms of going behind the curtain in the Wizard of Oz is sort of, the way I think about
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, good analogy. I have to say that I really enjoyed your podcast, and I can tell that you do put a lot of work into it. And I'm always amazed, though, that quite a number of guests I have on make a comment either during the show or after the show and say, "Oh, you've really done your homework. How did you know about that?" Or, "That's a really good question. You obviously understand my business," or whatever it might be. And I thought, well, isn't that kind of a given? If I'm having you on the podcast and I'm taking up your time and I'm learning from you, isn't it a given? But apparently it's not. And I have come across lots of podcasts. I typically dismiss them fairly quickly, but there are probably more podcasts out there that are not really well researched initially. They're interview formats, and they kind of just say, "Oh, tell us about your background," and "Okay, tell us what you do." And there's all the standard questions that, I've got them on my list and I fall back to them if I can't think of something to say right now. But it's to just use those, I think, is not a really good way to go.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, look, there's a very low barrier to entry to creating a podcast, I think. So, there's certainly a lot of ordinary ones out there.
Yeah. All right. Well, this is fascinating, Amanda. I could keep talking podcasting and innovation, which is what my podcast is all about. I could keep talking about that all day with you, but I'm aware of the time. So I think it's time we moved on to the Buzz, which is our innovation round on the podcast, and it's designed to help our audience, and they consider themselves innovators and leaders in their field. So hopefully we'll get some tips from you that'll inspire them to go and do something awesome today.
Cool.
So first one is right up your alley. What's the number one thing you think anyone needs to do to be more innovative?
I think they need to treat it as like they would any other competency on the job, and they need to learn. There are tons of training programs out there on innovation. Inventium has a great one. But I think treat it as any kind of competency where you need to read or to get trained or attend lectures or something. Like, it is a learnable, malleable skill. And I think, just really fundamentally understanding that, I think goes a long way. And look, I also think, like, a second thing, too many people think that innovation starts with a great idea. It doesn't. It has to start with a customer frustration. Customers buy solutions to their problems, as opposed to, some sexy new idea.
Yeah, I like both of those. Particularly the first one is around anyone can learn innovation, so just go out and learn it and treat it as a skill or a competency. And the second one, starting with a customer need or a customer frustration. Great advice. Now, what's the best thing you've done to develop new ideas?
We just apply our own innovation process at Inventium. So once or twice a year, we will go out to our clients and we will look for frustrations. We'll see what's frustrating them about what we do and about the innovation consulting industry in general. And, we'll be looking for what are the unsolved problems out there. And then we'll be putting that through our process. We'll be, thinking creatively, whether that be in a group or individually, and then we will apply an experimentation process or lean startup kind of process to that, before investing too much time and money in our ideas.
All right, I like that. Great advice. And do you have a favourite resource that you use a lot?
A favorite resource. Yeah, like do you mean like a book or a website or an app? Like how I wasn't not
It
quite
could be
sure how
any
to
of it.
answer
Yeah, it could
that.
be any of that. Could be any of
Um,
those.
yeah, look, one of my favorite apps is Pocket. So Pocket is an app, it's been around for quite a few years, where I find that a problem I have is if I, like a lot of people send me articles, and then if I'm researching something, I can often end up in an article black hole, which can be a massive time waster as well. So Pocket is, it's like a plugin that you can put on your browser and an app on your phone where if you find articles or get sent articles, you can simply save them to Pocket. And then when you actually want to read and have set aside time for reading those articles, you can read them as opposed to have them be a distraction or procrastination. And it's good. Like I don't have any social media apps on my phone, so if I'm not willing to like just be bored for a little bit, like let's just say I'm waiting for something, if I've got a few minutes, I can read an article on Pocket and learn something new on the Pocket app on my phone. So I find that very, very helpful.
Yeah, I love Pocket. It's a really useful app, and I like that you don't have the social media apps on your phone. I probably should take a leaf out of your book there too, because one of my frustrations right at the moment, and particularly with Facebook right now, is it's just gotten so noisy and there's just so much garbage on there that I do have a few groups that I run myself, and I'm also moderator in other people's groups. So I do want to go in and do those, but then in going in to look at those, there's just so much other noise that is getting in the way. It's a little bit like the full email inbox.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I don't have any apps that I will call addictive on my phone. My phone is just for utility apps. So no social media apps. I don't have email on my phone. Deleted that off my phone, I don't know, at least a year ago, and I just never put it back. Otherwise, I find I'm just checking email all the time. Don't have any games, but that's never been something that's interested me much. So yeah, my phone is just a utility device.
Yeah, well, there's great advice there about being more productive. Now, what's the best way to keep a project or a client on track?
Um, Gosh, I'm not sure how to answer that one. I guess it comes back to like what is going to keep things off track? Like, is it a lack of motivation? Is it a lack of being organized? So for me, it's about diagnosing the problem and then, finding a solution there. So, if it's a lack of being organized, then maybe, we need to be using Trello or Basecamp or some sort of project management software. If it's a motivational thing, then why is the motivation lacking? If it's a time thing, understanding, well, are they wasting time? Could they be saving time? So it really, for me, it's about getting to the root of the problem and going from there.
Hmm. Okay, well, that's a good approach. Now, what's the number one thing you think anyone can do to differentiate themselves?
Um, I think it's just trying to think about what is something unique that you could put into the world. What is, maybe something that hasn't been combined before, like with Inventium. Like there are lots of other innovation consultancies out there, but I don't know of any others that say that they're all about the science, that they take a science-based approach to innovation. So Inventium, for example, was me combining two passions and two things that really no one was combining 12 years ago, and not many people are combining them now 12 years later, and that is science, like specifically psychology and neuroscience and management science, and innovation. So that's kind of what it's been about in my life.
Yeah, and that's a really good model. So combining some things that you're passionate about and looking at how that makes you different about some than other people that might be playing in the same space.
Yeah, and it's the same for the podcast. Like I'm passionate about like innovation and innovators and people that are achieving amazing things, and I'm also fascinated by how people approach their work, because people approach their work very, very differently. And so combining those two things, well, that to me is something that I don't know any other podcast like how I work. So for me, that's, then putting something new and useful out into the world.
All right. Well, thanks, Amantha. This has been really great. Now, where can people find out some more about you and maybe even reach out to say thank you?
Yeah, sure. So you can find How I Work by searching How I Work on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. And you can find out more about Inventium at Inventium, which is invent with an IUM on the end.com.au. And, I'm on all the social media. I'm one of the only Amanthas in the world. So I think if you start typing in Amantha, at Twitter, I'm at Amantha, for example. I'm pretty easy to find.
Yeah. All right. Now, what's the number one piece of advice you'd give to any business owner who wants to be a leader in innovation and in productivity?
I think really think about how you are using your time. Think about what is your current capacity to do focused, uninterrupted work. Can you, for example, stay focused for more than 6 minutes, which is how long the average person can stay focused for before they get distracted by some sort of digital interruption? And if you feel like you are not using your time wisely, that is a skill that can be learned. There's plenty of ways out there. At Inventium, we designed a program called the Workday Reinvention Program to overcome this problem. But I think if people can use their time wisely, then you can just get so much better stuff done in the world and have more of an impact.
All right, that's great advice. Yeah, I think you said earlier everybody has the same amount of hours in the day, and how you spend that is really key to being more productive. I think that's a fundamental truth, and also, we can spend money, we can spend other things, and they're all renewable in a sense, whereas time isn't. All right, now finally then, Amantha, who would you like me to interview on a future InnovaBuzz podcast and why?
Oh, gosh. How do I answer that? Someone that, like, one of my personal heroes is Lin-Manuel Miranda, who wrote Hamilton, which is just my favorite musical of all time. I'm a massive musical theatre fan. So more of him on everything, please. Sorry, I don't know. Is that an okay answer?
Yeah, well, that's fine. Might be a challenge to get him on the podcast, but I just have to develop a really good pitch. We have had suggestions in the past like Elon Musk, which is proving a challenge, and Jim Carrey was another one, and that's proving a challenge as well. Certainly, I mean, we can get him on if we pay thousands of dollars, but that's not my approach. All right. Well, thanks so much for sharing your time and your insights with us today on the InnovaBuzz podcast, Amantha. I've really enjoyed this. We've had lots of fun talking about productivity, about innovation, and about your How I Work podcast. So I wish you all the best for the future, and let's keep in touch.
Cool. Thanks for having me.
I hope you enjoyed that insightful and informative conversation with Amantha and took something away from this episode. She shared some wonderful tips about finding opportunities for innovation by getting to really know your customers and their frustrations, and about how to focus your energy and time on what's important. I'd love to know what you took away from Amantha's episode. Leave a comment below the blog post, which you can find at innovabiz.co/Amantha Imber. That is AMANTHAIMBER. All lowercase, all one word, innovabiz.co/Amantha Imber. You'll also find contact information for getting in touch with Amantha there, as well as links to the Inventium website, to Amantha's social media pages, to the How I Work podcast, and the other resources we spoke about in the conversation. Amantha suggested we interview Lin-Manuel Miranda. He's the composer of the musical Hamilton, among other fantastic music, and Amantha suggested we get him on a future InnovaBuzz podcast. So, Lin, keep an eye on your inbox for an invitation from us to the InnovaBuzz podcast, courtesy of Amantha Imber. Remember to check out our Marketing Master mini class at innovabiz.co/marketing master. It's completely free and accessible without even giving away your email. And in less than 30 minutes, you'll gain total clarity about your ideal client and how you can communicate with them to build and strengthen an engaging, enduring relationship. And if you'd like our help to go even deeper into marketing mastery, or our help with podcast production or podcast development, then send me an email to jurgen@innovabiz.co and we'll set up a quick call to get to know one another and find out if we're a good fit. Tune in again next week for the InnovaBuzz podcast, where we've got more fantastic guests lined up, including Jackie Jubb, marketing mentor and copywriter, and Rebecca Lloyd from Rowboat. Stay connected with us by subscribing to the InnovaBuzz podcast at innovabuzz.com/subscribe. innovabuzz.com/subscribe. Make sure you never miss another episode. It would also mean a lot to me if you leave us a review, because what you think matters. I'd love to hear your thoughts, your ideas, your suggestions, or questions you have, so go ahead and share them in the comments below the blog post for this episode. Until next time, I'm Jurgen Strauss from InnovaBizz. Remember, be awesome and keep innovating.